The question then becomes where he'll play his next game. And my feeling is the New York Jets. All right, welcome in. It's the Breer Report for October the 4th. Week 5 is now underway. The Falcons beat the Bucs in a thriller last night, a real shootout, and we will get to that in a minute. But our first topic for this Friday morning is Davante Adams and updating where we're at on that. He, of course, is still dealing with a hamstring injury. It seems unlikely that he'll play for the Raiders this week. And the question then becomes where he'll play his next game. And my feeling is the answer to that question is still the New York Jets. Now, as we've said over the course of the last few days, other teams involved in this are convinced that Davante Adams, and maybe Aaron Rodgers too, are trying to engineer a trade of Adams to the Jets. And the other teams involved, the Bills, the Steelers, have both inquired, are operating on the assumption that that right now is where he's most likely to wind up. Now, that is complicated a little bit just by the mere fact that that perception is out there. Adams initially went to the Raiders with his preferences. His preference was to be traded to a team with a quarterback he's familiar with. The two obvious teams that fall into that category are the Jets with Aaron Rodgers and the Saints with Derek Carr, who Davante Adams played with both at Fresno State a decade ago and for that single year in Vegas. The Saints cap situation may preclude them from being too involved in this. The Bills cap situation may wind up eliminating them too. And that really leaves you with the Jets and whether or not the Jets can find a middle ground with the Raiders. And if other teams feel like this thing isn't completely on the level, they may be reluctant to put a real offer in front of the Raiders, which means the Raiders have to be able to gauge his value and figure out what's fair without having a real bidding war for the player. Now, what would his value be? Now, I've heard the idea of a second round plus being thrown around out there. My understanding is the Raiders haven't specifically asked for anything, but they would like something significant in return for Adams, obviously. And the idea of a 2 plus something else is akin to what we saw in the Brandon Ayuk negotiation back a few weeks ago. That, of course, was involving a 26-year-old player who has the opportunity to be on your roster and be a major piece of your offense for the next half decade. That's not what Adams is right now. He turns 32 in December. And so I would say the more reasonable comps would be Stephon Diggs and Keenan Allen. Now, Keenan Allen was traded from the Chargers to the Bears in March. Stephon Diggs was traded from the Bills to the Texans in April. Allen went for a 4th round pick. Diggs went with a 5th rounder and a 6th rounder to Houston for a future second. So that was a 2nd round pick 1 year out, which if you add all of that up, it's roughly equivalent to the value of a 3rd rounder. Now, both Diggs and Allen had better numbers last year than Adams. You can argue, of course, that both Allen and Diggs had better quarterback situations. That's totally fair. But you're talking about two guys with similar numbers. Allen is 8 months older than Adams. Adams is 11 months older than Diggs, so they're all in the same age range. Contractually, really, if you look at the deals that they're signed to, Diggs wound up being in a contract year when all was said and done after renegotiation. Allen is in a contract year. And then you've got Adams, who has balloon payments in the next 2 years, which effectively makes this a contract year for him as well. So that's really what you're looking at is value right in that third or 4th round range. I can't imagine the Raiders would move him for a day 3 pick. So I don't know that a 4th rounder would get it done. I think the sweet spot is probably there at a 3rd rounder. Whether or not that's enough, whether or not the Raiders feel comfortable taking that for a player that they gave up so much for 1st and 2nd round picks just a couple of years ago, that remains an open question. But ultimately, I do think that Davante Adams winds up playing for the Jets. All right, our second topic is the Chiefs receiver situation and where they're at right now. And this is something we talked about in the Thursday night post game. This is something going forward that is something to monitor because there still isn't complete clarity on where Rashee Rice is with his knee. And the reason is there's so much swelling in the knee. It's been hard for doctors to get a clear picture. of the ligaments within his knee. I'm not going to bore people with all the medical mumbo jumbo there. The reality is he's going to go have his knee scoped next week. When the doctors go in, they'll be able to take a look. There's a fear not just of ACL damage, but also of PCL damage. And while there is a glimmer of hope that he might be able to come back again, I'd say it's just that it's a glimmer. They're pretty certain that they're going to be without him for the year. And that adds on to the fact that now they're looking at having a receiver group that may not just be without Rice, but also without Hollywood Brown. It seems unlikely that Hollywood Brown will come back either. And so if we want to spin that forward, where does that leave the Chiefs? Well, their plan for right now is to take a look at what this looks like with Xavier Worthy, with Juju Smith-Schuster, with, of course, Travis Kelce over the next couple of weeks. They don't need to do anything right now. The trade deadline, which has been moved back, is just over a month from now. So over the next couple of weeks, they'll get a look at what their offense looks like without Rice in there. They've been playing without Hollywood, obviously, for a few weeks now, and get a better gauge of whether or not what they have is enough going forward. There could be some opportunity there too at the trade deadline to make a move. You'll get a couple of teams that might be out of it, that might have a surplus of receivers to deal with. The Panthers would be one. Adam Thielen, of course, is older, and he could be somebody who could be available. Deontay Johnson is a really interesting one, very talented. He's had some football makeup issues, I think is the best way to put it. But the Chiefs have been good at absorbing those types of guys into their program. He is in a contract year. The Panthers could easily look at it and say, by the time we're any good, he's not going to be around. So it's worth trying to get a pick for him now. That'd be one to watch. And then I would also look at the Tennessee Titans. DeAndre Hopkins is in a contract year. And then Treylon Burks is sort of similar to what they traded for with Kadarius Toney 2 years ago. Now, the Toney move didn't work out long term, but it did help him win a Super Bowl in the short term. So could they look at somebody like Treylon Burks as a reclamation project? I think something like that will be on the table. But for right now, the plan is to get a look at what they've got in-house and then come up with a plan going forward. And of course, again, a critical week or so ahead for Rashee Rice as he goes in and has the scope on his knee and figures out whether or not there's any chance at all. Again, unlikely, but whether it figures out if there's any chance at all if he plays again in 2024. Finally, our third topic, that wild Thursday night game and what it means for the two teams atop the NFC South now. The Falcons pull even with the Buccaneers. For the Falcons, I think you see a team now that has been able to navigate clutch situations 4 weeks in a row and being put in those spots and having to respond to those spots over and over again. I know Raheem Morris and his team feel really good about that. On top of that, we're seeing an offense that's coming together now. And we're seeing an offense that's getting used to playing for Zach Robinson. We saw some creativity that we hadn't seen before in what they were doing, which shows the players are getting more comfortable and the coaches in turn are getting more comfortable calling the game a certain way. And, I think maybe the most encouraging thing is those 3 top 10 picks, what they were able to do last night. Now, those guys may never live up to the draft billing. Those guys may never live up to the expectations of what they were going to be when they were coming into the pros. But Kyle Pitts really hasn't played at that speed going back to the knee injury that he had in November of 2022. He had 2 surgeries to fix that knee. He was not running at the same speed last year. He did not look the same early this year. Last night, he started to play a little faster, which is what they've seen in practice. Bijan Robinson still this close to cracking the big one. And then Drake London looked like a legitimate number 1 receiver. You add that to what they were getting out of Darnell Mooney and Ray McLeod and Tyler Algier, and it looks like the type of group that can grow into a very, very dangerous offense over time. Maybe most encouraging is the way that Kirk Cousins was showing a little bit more confidence sitting there in the pocket and driving off of his back foot. So lots of good stuff from the Falcons. I also thought the Buccaneers played really well. Both teams, of course, have issues on defense. The Bucs are going to get healthier on defense. They're expecting next week to have Kalijah Kancey, their former first-round defensive tackle, and Antoine Winfield back in the lineup, and that's going to be huge for them. Offensively, you look at what they did last night. Baker Mayfield was incredibly efficient, which we've seen over the first month of the season. But beyond just that, they got the running game going. And before Bucky Irving had the fumble at the end of the game, at the end of the game, it really looked like that running game was going to put the Falcons away. So while it's not the result they were looking for, and it's a tough loss to take, I think the Bucs can look at the way last night played out on a short week on the road and feel pretty good about where they're at. Again, especially with guys like Kancey and Winfield coming back to the lineup. Hope is, of course, they get Luke Gadecki back on the offensive side of the ball. So those two teams, you came into the season thinking the NFC South wasn't going to have a real Super Bowl contender, and I'm not putting those teams on the level of a Detroit or a San Francisco yet, but I mean, I think you see some real potential for what the Bucs and Falcons can grow into becoming. The Saints have shown obviously a pretty high ceiling over the first month of the season as well. Should be a fun year in the NFC South. That'd be my first takeaway. That'd be my big takeaway from the Thursday night game. That's it for this Friday's Breer Report. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy week 5, everybody. We'll be right back here with you on Tuesday morning.